Hey guys, it's Counting My Review for this week's episode of Westworld, Season 3, Episode 5 genre, and as you guys know, I was really excited for this episode, mainly because of the way things left off last week. The way things ended off last week kind of felt like what you would see in the season finale, with all of the plot lines kind of coming to a head, everyone really starting to come face to face, everything conjoining in that way. You know, the whole, sort of setup with Bernard and Stubbs and them trying to track down Dolores and then Dolores thwarting their plan. And because of that, I honestly had no idea where the show was going. And that's not something that usually happens with Westworld. Like, yeah, this is a show that thrives on the element of surprise and thrives on confusing you, but there's still been, things that I knew we were going to get to eventually. This season, I really didn't know how things were going to play out. So we get to this episode, and yeah, it was definitely different from what I was expecting for sure. And I'm not going to lie to you, this episode, since it's come out, pretty much has become the most, polarizing episode of Westworld we've maybe ever had. And to be honest, it's very easy to see why, because even when watching this episode, at first, I ate it all up. I loved what they were doing, but then as time went on, I really kind of felt conflicted, and so I finally watched it again today, and I think I settled on the fact that I do like this episode. I do think this is a really well done, very different kind of episode than we've gotten of Westworld before. But I think my biggest thing with this episode is that it is definitely the weakest of the season. It's the first one that kind of starts to show the trappings that I was worried that this season might fall into, and that is that because they only have 8 episodes, it almost feels like they are doing things, they are really haphazardly moving things forward, and I don't know if that was exactly the right approach, but we're just going to get into it right now. So obviously, the first thing to talk about is everything going on with Serac, because holy shit, I mean, they are not hiding anything when it comes to this character. And I've said it this season, Westworld's storytelling is much different this season than it's really ever been. And I don't think any episode shows that better than what we got with Serac here, which, if this was operating on normal Westworld standards, I don't think any of this would have been revealed until probably the penultimate episode of the season. So I'm glad that we have more of a backstory into who this guy really is. And Vincent Cassel, I have to say, has done such an excellent job of playing this character. He was interviewed about this episode, and he said the way he wanted to go about this was make him feel very mysterious and almost emotionless in that way, to the point where he feels like a blank slate. So you really couldn't put your finger on who he really was, what his, who his true loyalties were, what his true purpose was, all that kind of stuff. But then as the season went on, he would become more and more emotional and more human in that way. And after this episode, it was definitely the right choice, because we have a much, like I said, better idea of who he really is. We do dive a little bit deeper into the story he was telling Maeve in the last episode about him and his brother and this nuclear destruction of Paris, which, what a devastating sight to think about. But basically, because of this and because of how much it impacted them and wiped away pretty much everyone they cared about, this is what created Rehoboam. And I thought this was really interesting. We've heard about Rehoboam since the first episode of this season. We kind of had an inkling of what it was, but we didn't know specifically, and now we know basically the idea of it is that Serac wants to be in control of everyone's future. He knows pretty much every outcome that's going to happen. He wants to do what he can to predict certain catastrophes from going on, and basically this is his way of doing that. Now, who else, of course, wants to do that? Well, that would be Insight, so he teams up with Insight and things like that, and, I think this does actually make a lot of sense, because we know in the last episode, Serac said that the enemy is not Dolores or Maeve. It's just humanity. Humanity is eventually going to implode. Humanity will kill itself, and I feel like Serac thinks that he's going to be the one to cure this from happening, when if anything, I feel like if this episode kind of makes it seem like he's almost feeding into it. Like, he doesn't realize it, but he's almost causing this destruction from happening. And I really like what we get with him and Liam Dempsey Sr., because we obviously knew Liam, but we didn't know his father, who's a lot more valuable and definitely more of an asset than I probably the person that Dolores wanted all along. And, you know, he is very interested in the more financial aspect of it all. He doesn't really care about the objective. In fact, he pretty much just ridicules them for it. He thinks it's absurd. And honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a bad reaction to have, considering that, yeah, this is kind of crazy. The way he's going about it, it's a little nuts in that way. And, you know, Serac, he eventually realizes that, you know, there are high-risk individuals that could end up disrupting future events. And so he's doing whatever he can to try to make sure that this goes the way that he wants it to go. He's doing everything that he can to make sure that Rehoboam turns out the way that it should. And the reveal at the end of this episode that basically, you know, we'll get to the big thing, but him actually, when we find out that he is actually doing this to his own brother, that's how obsessed Serac is with Rehoboam. It turned into it went from an idea to something that now I think is a full-on obsession. Like, this is everything that he cares about. Every single action that he takes is entirely for Rehoboam. That's entirely all he cares about at this point. He cares more about that than his own brother. He put his own brother in this mental institution of sorts, and he's testing on him, and Dempsey obviously finds this pretty fucked up, and so he really wants to try to put a stop to this as much as he can. You know, Serac kind of realizes that he's a lost cause at this point, and he killed him. He literally killed Liam Dempsey Sr., and that scene was absolutely horrifying, the way it was done. Not just because of him saying, like, oh, you didn't make it onto that plane, but the way that he staged it as a plane crash, it kind of just shows how everything, similar to Dolores right now, everything's kind of gone the way Serac has wanted it to up to this point. You know, he's kind of laid out this plan, and it's one of those things where everything that's happening right now is pretty much inevitable because he's seen it. So he's kind of above everyone else. And I like this because I was really worried that Serac was going to become this very one-note villain. And I'm glad he's not going in that direction, because Westworld's always been one of those shows where there are no black and white characters. You know, like, say, Dolores, for example. Yes, we know that she has done a lot of things that are very unethical. She's committed a lot of violent acts, but there's cause for it. There's definitely a good reason for it to happen. And I think the same is going for Serac. In his mind, he thinks that what he's doing is okay. You know, he's doing this as a way to try to help everyone and stop these incoming disasters from occurring. But he also is, I think, going a bit too far with it. And so I like the way that the lines are kind of being blurred there. And I also really like the reveal that this entire episode, you know, we hear him talking, and it turns out the person he was talking to was actually Dolores, who really is the first person to diametrically oppose him, and someone that he is actually kind of fearful of because of what she ends up doing, obviously, in this episode, which, you know, I'll get to that in a little bit later. But that whole final scene where he's, like, confronting her and basically, you know, allowing, he's verbally, like, taunting her and things like that, and you can tell that Dolores is very much above him. She knows what makes him tick. She knows exactly what he has laid out, and so I like the way that it very much is a battle of wits at this point. I really like the way that's going down. Neither of these characters are good or bad. Both of them have showed tendencies that are really bad. They've shown tendencies that show that they are a threat, but they've also shown tendencies to where maybe they are the hero in all of this. So I really do like the way that's being set up. I like the contrast there. I like that we have a lot more insight into what, you know, Serac is doing. Of course, pun absolutely intended, as always. And I think that was definitely a necessary thing. I think we needed to see a lot of what happened with Serac. I think we needed to see what his whole master plan was, because it really was one of the only things, you know, one of the only few lingering questions that I wasn't really sure how that was all going to play out. I will say, though, I'm really glad that they reveal that Serac is a real person. I know a lot of people were thinking that he was like this force projection by Rehoboam, and he's not actually real. So I'm glad to see that's not the case. He did very much invent Rehoboam, and that, as far as we know, he is a real person. And I like they're not going in a direction where he's, like, Ford either. I know some people thought that might be the case, and I'm glad that's not what they're doing either. I'm glad that we know that Serac is real, but that he's so powerful that he's able to, like, project himself into other places. I think that's a cool idea, and I like the way they are playing around with that for sure. And a lot of the things they've hinted at throughout the season, like, you know, seeing the white circle and, like, the black line, like, across it, of course, that now being Rehoboam, it just makes a lot more sense. And so I do like the way we got clarity on that in this episode for sure. I think that was definitely one of the most effective things about it. So I don't really have too many problems with that half of the episode at all, nor do I have a problem with the other half of this episode involving Caleb, which was easily my favorite part of this episode. Everything we got with Caleb here, I thought was brilliant. I love the way that it was played. I love the way they're handling this character. And Aaron Paul, man, he is just consistently impressing me. I mean, I've always loved Aaron Paul as an actor. You know, I think that he was just as great on Breaking Bad as Bryan Cranston was, to be honest. And this show is definitely just showing the versatility in him as an actor. And I like the way they're playing it, because Caleb at this point, he really is one of the only real ordinary people left in this show. He's one of the only people that doesn't really have anything that special to him other than, you know, him being the only, you know, him being someone that just isn't for all of the control going on in the world. He's not, you know, he feels like he's above that. He wants more than that. He wants something tangible in his life. And so I like where we end up going with him, where, you know, after the events of last week's episode, he confronts Liam, and Liam very quickly injects him with this drug, which we heard about last week. It's genre, and it's exactly what we thought it was going to be. And I really like this idea that he's going through these, like, 6 stages of genres in that way. It's a cool way for them to tell this story. It's a really fun way to do it, but it also does a lot for Caleb, because going through all these different genres, he's starting to see a lot more of what's going on and starting to realize that what he wants to do might not exactly be all it's cracked up to be. He might actually be in a bad position in that way. And so I really do like the way things are playing out there, especially the sequence we get, you know, when he eventually realizes what Dolores' master plan is. Because, you know, they evade all of this, like, security and things like that, and all these cops, and they're able to get them all down. And then we see Lena Waithe and Marshawn Lynch's characters again, who I did not think we were going to see again, but I like that we did actually get to see them again here. It kind of starts to bring Caleb's character full circle, because they were the first two characters he interacted with, Ash and Giggles. And I really like what we did get with them here. You know, they're very much working with, you know, Dolores right now, and Dolores, we realize her way of thwarting what Insight is doing is that she wants to take all of the information that they have, meaning literally everything, and we know exactly what they've had. They have information on everyone, but not only do they have information, they have, you know, what's going to happen to them in the future. That's how she was able to tell Caleb that he's going to commit suicide years from now. And so she decides to just release it all to the public. And oh my God, the scene of her releasing all this information, I honestly think is one of the best scenes Westworld has maybe ever done. Not just because it relies entirely on just visualization, but just because of how raw it really does feel. I mean, you feel yourself in that situation. What if you were just on your phone and all of a sudden all of these predictions are coming to you, things that are almost unavoidable, things that are going to happen. I would obviously alter the perception of yourself, and you would think differently of yourself, because you're kind of wondering, what would drive you to make this decision? Simple things like, what's going to happen with Ash and things like that. And we realize that Happy might actually possibly die, and Ash is obviously freaking out about that. And the fact that you have this mother and daughter on the bus, and the mother finds out that her daughter is actually going to commit suicide at like ages 8 to 10, I think it said, so that's obviously very concerning. And her mom's like freaking out because of that, and I like that she like grabs her wrists there, and so little things like that. I also like that it doesn't necessarily present Liam as the enemy. He actually is kind of in the right with what he's saying, that no, this is a really bad idea. It's going to cause all of this destruction and all of this war. But I think the most important thing about this entire scene, and the reason why I think it's one of the best scenes in all of Westworld, is what Caleb says to Liam. He has fully convinced himself at this point that Insight, they're the bad guys, and that they are the ones that they need to take down. They are holding him back, that they have this false hope on everyone. Everything that they do is false. Everything that they do comes, everything that they do is for the wrong reasons. And I think that is a fantastic scene. And when Aaron Paul is just to the way he acted out that entire scene of him just telling Liam how he is so, how he would rather die than be in control of what Insight is doing, just really shows how much this has affected him, how much it's scarred him in that way. And I really do love the way they are, again, diving deeper into this character and what it could potentially mean. Again, I will get into in a little bit. But the way all of this plays out, not only does she release this to just these people on the train, but literally everyone in the world, I think is a brilliant idea, because this is now maybe even worse than what Serac is doing. Serac, he wanted to try to stop these things from happening, while Dolores is now doing kind of the same thing, but it's way worse, because now everyone knows their fate, and because they know their fate, they're going to do everything they can to try to prevent it from getting that way. And in doing so, we see immediately there are all these like mass riots and things like that going down. So yeah, the rest of the season is probably going to be absolute chaos, and it's mainly because of Dolores. And I think that that's a really cool idea. The idea of free will, that there is no such thing as free will, that things are predetermined. There isn't a way to prevent that. And Dolores is trying to stop that from happening, that nothing is now predetermined, that there is a way to stop that. But I think her doing what she did, I think it is actually going to make all of these futures come true now. Just because of the way things turned out here, and the way that Caleb kind of starts to realize that maybe this isn't the right thing, maybe what Dolores is doing is wrong, I think is really well done, and how all of these genres kind of get him to realize that, especially once Dolores is shot, and he realizes that it's gone right through her. She's not bleeding, she's completely fine. Just the look on his face, Aaron Paul just killed it in that scene. I love the way it was done. If there was an episode to like submit to the Emmys, I think it would absolutely be this one, because I think he's just absolutely killing it on the show. I love what he is doing here, really. And when Caleb's like wondering what genre it is, and Happy's telling him like it's reality, I thought that was a really interesting scene, because of course this very quickly leads to Liam's death, which this is where we get to the stuff I'm not as happy about with this episode, is Liam dying. I get why Liam had to die, but I don't understand why Connells had to die as well. I thought that Connells, it honestly felt like Connells was here because he was starting to, be the beginning of Dolores's larger army that she's going to form. But no, he's just taken out in this episode. You know, he blows himself up, and I don't understand what the point of him really was. Because, yeah, I get it. He's giving her this information, but why couldn't, Hale have done that? Why couldn't one of her other clones have done that? I don't understand why why Connells had to die. I just don't really get it. But obviously, because Connells has blown himself up, Liam is really no longer any use to them. So he is now shot by Ash. But what ends up happening before he dies is probably the most crucial part of this episode, besides all that information being released, is, Caleb is talking to him, and Liam kind of says something to the effect of, you don't really know who you even are. And we kind of get these flashbacks that maybe give us the idea that what we've been seeing with Caleb so far isn't actually real. And I will say right now, I do not think that Caleb is a host. I don't think that is where they're going with this, because it'd be far too predictable. What I do think could be potentially happening is that Insights planted these false memories into Caleb's head. They are basically fucking with him in that way, to basically relieve him of whatever he once did, because it seems like whatever he was doing is far more dangerous than what he thought he was doing. It wasn't very unethical. He was, killing people and things like that, and it wasn't at all what we thought. So I think there's a lot more going on with Caleb than we've thought at this point, and I think Dolores also knows what's been going on with Caleb. I think it's far more than just he seems like the only decent guy. That's kind of why I thought she took him under her wing at first, but I think there's much more of a reason beyond that. I think it's more of she knows something about Caleb that we do not at this point. And so I do like that mystery. I think the way that things wrap up with Dolores, especially, with Caleb saying, hey, maybe Liam is right, and him kind of coming to terms with the fact that, yeah, this is wrong. What we are doing is not good, and maybe I just should not be involved with this. But Dolores basically telling them, like, he's in this now. He can't get out of it at this point, and that everyone needs to wake up. I just thought was such a great way to wrap things up. I'm very excited to see where this is going to go. I love what they're doing with with Caleb, and I think it was definitely my favorite part of this episode. So really, what is my larger problem here? Again, I like both plot lines. My problem is I just do not feel that both of these plot lines belonged in the same episode. I get it that they're trying to make a parallel between what Dolores is doing now and what Serac did, but Dolores is not at the center of her plotline. Caleb is, and I personally feel that if they really wanted to go with this idea of, Caleb trying out this genre drug, I think they should have just made that entire episode, or it should have been Serac's backstory. I think that should have been an entire episode. I don't think it works as one big episode. It felt clunky to me, mainly because they focused way more on the present storyline than they did on Serac's backstory, and while I understood the gist of it, I feel like they could have maybe dived into it even more than they did in this episode. So that's really, I would say, my larger complaint. Also, at this point, Bernard just does not have that much of a character. He kind of just seems like he is being fooled constantly. He has no idea what's actually going on. I really don't know what's going on with him and Stubbs at this point. I like that Stubbs is alive, because like I said, I've loved their banter throughout this entire season. I think it's been one of the best things they've done with Bernard for sure. But I just have no idea what they're going to do with him now. I don't understand what his role is moving forward. I don't get where they're really going with that. I don't really know. It just kind of seems like at this point, he's just being outsmarted by Dolores, and that's not a good character to me. Season 2, his entire story was that he was just confused by everything, and then we realized he scrambled his memory. I don't want this season to be the same. I wanted this season to be Bernard Bernard versus Dolores, and I hope it continues that way, because it kind of seems like we're starting to move away from that, and if that's the case, I'm really questioning what the point is of Bernard even still being in this show, and why Dolores even kept him alive all along if he doesn't even serve that much of a purpose. But I guess we'll have to see where things really do go moving forward. And it's confusing to me because I feel like they had an opportunity to do something with Bernard in this episode, with him trying to kind of, make Connell's question, like, what is she asking you to do? Have you ever really questioned that? Why do you have to be under her command? And I feel like he could have done something there, because we know he has that remote control. We know last week he thought that Liam was under her control, and he wasn't. I thought he was going to do something similar with Connell's here, and that's not really what happened. And so, Connell's offing himself, I think not only is a detriment to the character, but it's a detriment to Bernard's story, because I really do feel they could have done something there, and they just didn't. And now I'm just questioning, like, what's even the point of Bernard moving forward? I just don't really know what they're even going to do with this character from here on out. I guess we'll just have to see, but I'm very unsure of where they're going with this. It's the one story where I just don't know if I like where Bernard is really heading. I don't know if it's a good direction for his character. So I guess we'll just have to see the way things do play out overall, but I guess we'll see. Again, I like the interaction between him and Stubbs this season, but now that you've gone through him trying to track down Dolores, it almost feels like his story has screeched to a halt, and I think that is definitely unfortunate, because I love Jeffrey Wright a lot, and I do like the Bernard character, but at this point, I feel he's kind of stagnant as a character, and I don't really know where he's headed from here on out, to be honest. So yeah, that's everything going on story-wise within this episode, but now we are going to get into directing and writing stuff, which directing in this episode was fantastic. I love the way this episode was directed, just the way it really peeled back the curtain on Serac, but also what it was trying to do with Dolores, I thought was definitely really well done, and you definitely did feel the immediacy of it all, especially when it came, like I said, to the information being released to everyone. The way it very quickly evolved into this mass panic of sorts, and all these riots breaking out, felt like a natural reaction. It feels like this is what would actually happen if this were, to occur in the real world. This is what actually would go down, and I thought that was definitely a very effective scene for sure. And the writing here, like I said, I think was very well done for both storylines, definitely. I just wish it would have been differently. I wish that it would have been 2 separate episodes. I think that's really what does hurt it, because Serac's story, it just feels a little bit undercooked. It feels like we could have gotten a little bit more into Serac and his brother. I get it that Serac became obsessed with Rehoboam, but I really would have liked to focus more on how he first did this for his brother, and then he did it, basically for everyone. I wish we could have seen more of a natural arc there, kind of similar to something we got with Delos last season, the whole episode with Delos and how he started off, like this corporate guy who was just interested in money and didn't really care about Westworld, and then basically, William ended up using him as an experiment of sorts, to see if he could, use him, copy him as a host, and seeing how he became more vulnerable in that way. I would have liked to see something like that here, and we didn't really get it. And again, I would really attest that to just this episode not focusing on that enough. It was too focused on the Dolores and Caleb plotline, which I love. I love what they were doing with Caleb. I love what it had to say about, like, identity and the choices he's made and things like that. I think it was a really good sort of self-reflection for him, but again, I really do wish that was 2 separate episodes, and I think they could have done a better job with that. But the way they're peeling back the layers of some of these characters, I think, are really well done, and the way they're still keeping Caleb at an arm's length in that way, I think is a good idea. I like that he's still kind of a mysterious character, because he's new. He is a new character, and we shouldn't know too much about him at this point. So I do like that. They are still keeping that mystery very much intact. I like the way that's playing out, and I like the way we're setting up this conflict between Dolores and Serac. I think that's definitely very effective for sure. Like I said, just the way this episode was written, it just kind of feels like it was too much for one episode. I think we should have gotten an episode of Serac, or we should have gotten an episode on Caleb. It can't be both. It can't be both because it just simply did not work. It felt like too much was going on, and it felt like for the first time, 8 episodes just might not be enough for this season. There's 3 episodes left, and I don't know if they're going to be able to wrap all this up in 3 episodes. I know obviously it's not the last season or anything, but I just feel like this season should be a little bit longer overall, maybe 9 or 10 episodes. I think I would have maybe liked this episode a little bit more. And look, I said something similar about William in the last episode, where I wish we would have seen a more thorough backstory. But at least with that episode, I still could have seen all those storylines coming together. This episode had the opposite problem, where I just don't feel these two storylines blended nearly as well as this episode thought it did. And I think that's really this episode's biggest detriment overall. He's always outdoing himself, and it's just very impressive to see here for sure. I really did love the way that was done. And the editing of this episode, again, I just thought was choppy. I really did feel this episode was kind of choppy with the way it was edited. Just the way things played out, I didn't think was as good as it could have been. I liked, again, what they were doing with Caleb's genres. I thought that was definitely effective, but the way it would cut back to Serac and his brother, again, it almost felt like its own episode to me, and I think that's, again, just my biggest problem with this episode is just, again, I like a lot of what's going on story-wise, minus Bernard, who at this point I just don't really feel like has that much of a point in the story anymore. Minus that, I think I liked a lot of what was going on story-wise here. But I just feel that it would have been more effective if it would have, been its own episodes. I feel like that would have really worked out here. We got some of the best scenes in all of Westworld in this episode with the information scene on the subway. I thought that was very effective. Or the scene where Serac is killing Liam Dempsey Sr. That was a really great scene for sure, especially for Vincent Cassel. Or the reveal of, that there's something off with Caleb. He's not exactly who we thought he was all this time. Again, a lot of good stuff in this episode. It's just a little too much. And I think if we would have had a more streamlined episode, we could have maybe had a little bit more, of a focus here. I think that would have made for just a better episode overall. So again, I want to reiterate, I didn't dislike this episode. I quite liked this episode a lot. I loved what we got with Caleb. I love what we got with Serac. It's just, as an episode of television, I just feel that it could have been a little bit better. I think that it got a little too focused on just showing off its visuals and things like that, and not enough on picking a story. I like the parallels with Dolores and Serac. I just wish that it was a little bit more focused overall. It's definitely a very effective episode. There were definitely some really great scenes here. It's not at all a bad episode of the show. It is definitely the weakest episode of the season, but it is one that I still really did enjoy overall. So I am going to give this episode of Westworld, Season 3, Episode 5 genre, overall, a B. So like I said, guys, we only have 3 episodes left of this season. I don't really know how they're going to be able to wrap all this up, to be honest with you. I just don't see how they're going to be able to do that. I feel like there's so much story they have left to tell, and I'm just not sure where we're actually headed at this point. I know Maeve is coming back next week. We're probably going to see William again because he was in the trailer, and I think we're definitely going to see him again, but I just don't know what they're going to end up doing there overall. But I guess we'll just have to see moving forward. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.